The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
So there's a famous Maisa my father said over with Rabbi Zalman. It was a Shabbos afternoon, time for Mincha in Yerushalayim. And the Maggid, not the Maggid, the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim, Rabbi Aryeh Levine, was giving a drasha. And at the end of the drasha was about Shalom Bayis and taking good care of your spouse. And Rabbi Zalman walked in at the end of the drasha before Mincha. And he was listening to Rabbi Aryeh Levine talk about proper Shalom Bayis and treatment of your wife. And when the drasha ended, Rabbi Zalman ran over to Rabbi Aryeh Levine and he said, Rabbi Aryeh, I know you were referring to me. I know you were talking to me about that part of Shalom Bayis. And I assure you, I'll work on it and I'll change, and this is what I'll do. You had to hear my father say over that Maisa. Because my father knew about the relationship with Rabbi Zalman and Rebbetzin Bela Hinda. He lived in the house. And if ever you wanted to see beautiful and perfect harmony, V'achva Shalom V'reyus and Shalom Bayis, you saw it by Rabbi Zalman and his Rebbetzin. And yet, when he heard Rabbi Aryeh Levine, the first thing he heard was, he means me. You see, that's the difference between someone who's a gadol and not. A gadol, even things that are not for them to hear, they hear it. But we, things that are for us to hear, our first response is, I am so happy he said that. Because if those two did not hear it, ay chaval al azman, ala panim. They mamish need to hear it. Hello, sugar plum. I mean you, and me, and us, and we. Not the next person. Shabbos Chanukah, during World War I, there was a shul in Vienna where a Rav was delivering a drasha. And since it was Shabbos Chanukah, he dedicated the drasha to the courageous individuals known as the Chashmonaim. They changed the world. And then the Rav took the unusual position of saying, we need more Chashmonaim, more courageous individuals. People who are willing to change the trend that we're seeing in Jewish education. And then he added what was novel for 100 years ago, 1918. He said, what's going to be with Chinuch HaBanos? Who's going to educate our girls? Who will be today's Chashmonaim to change the terrible reality when they weren't getting a proper Jewish education? And there were many women in the Ezras Nashim, including a young woman from Krakow. And she was so taken by the drasha, she decided then and there she was going to become the Chashmonai. And that girl from Krakow took the message to heart and certainly had the greatest impact on the world for Chinuch HaBanos since Brias HaOlam. And I'm sure you figured out already that girl from Krakow was Sarah Schneer. Because she heard it and she got it. Ma Shmua Shama Uba. What's it? What is the message for me? The great mashpia, one of the biggest in our generation, Rabbi Elimelech Bitterman says over a terrific story that happened a few years ago. There was someone who, when a Rav went to visit someone in the hospital and blow shofar, and he noticed from another bed someone listening to the shofar, mamish crying. It seemed like that other person was a shreimeya. He really got the message of shofar. So the Rav went over to that person and said, you seem to really get it. How's that? He says, Rabbi, I'll tell you. I used to be in the Navy here in Israel. My specialty was Morse code because when you did submarines under the water, you communicated with Morse code. A long sound, a short sound, a few sharp sounds, some long sounds. And I was an expert in Morse code. Eventually, I retired from the Navy. I was actually so good, they used my services in India. And then when I came back here, I wanted to continue working somewhere in the field of Morse code. I saw that in a particular morning between the hours of 10 and 12, somebody was interviewing for people who knew Morse code well, they'd get the job. He tells the rabbi, I came to the office, I opened the door, and sitting in the waiting room were 40 other people, just sitting listening to the soft music that plays nonstop in the background. I sat down, I listened to the music. A minute later, I jump up. I walk through the office, I open up by the receptionist, and she says, stop. And I continued walking, and I went right into the boss. And I told the boss why I'm here, why I should get the job. He interviewed me, and I landed the job. When the boss walked me out, we went through the waiting room of 40 people, and they started to complain. He just jumped up, he walked in. What a chutzpah, we've been waiting. And he looked at them and said, I've been playing this background music the whole time. Except it isn't background music, it's actually Morse code. And in Morse code it has said, if you understood the message, don't sit in the waiting room, just get up and walk right in. This guy understood the message. Obviously he's very good at Morse code, and you people blew it. He turned to the Rav in the hospital and he said, that's why I understand the Kol Shofar. Because many people hear the Kol Shofar and they think it's about someone else. And they think it's the music of the railroad tracks. And they think it's the sound of, no, the Rav doesn't understand, it was the other and the other. But I hear the Kol Shofar and I know it means Hashem is telling me, get up, walk into my office, and let's have a talk. We should be Zayta this Rosh Hashanah, Lishmaya Kol Shofar. Not just to hear it, but to understand good and well that for me, the Kol Shofar means me. And for you, the Kol Shofar means you.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org